NOFA-Mass, and I'm here with Alec Giuseppe of Ironbound Farm. We're here second year in a row for the NRCS Conservation Innovation Grant, which is run by a consortium of NOFA chapters, NOFA New Jersey, NOFA Connecticut, and NOFA-Mass. So today I'm just going to chat with Alec a little bit about his practices here and the farm overall. Alec, can you let me know a little bit about the farm and the tasting room and how it's been evolving?
Yep. Yeah. So here we are in Hardin County, New Jersey. We're on a 108-acre site. We are a diversified operation. We have about 10,000 apple trees. We raise chickens for eggs, which our flock is about 2,500 birds. We also raise meat birds, chickens, and turkeys. And this past year, we started a hog operation, so we're raising about 40 pigs a year, and might be dabbling with some goats and sheep to be grazing our marginal lands that are harder to get to with equipment. And then we do about 15 acres of vegetables, and then we have about half an acre of tunnels and greenhouses for year-round production.
Awesome, that's fantastic. And can you tell me a little bit about your farming practices, both on the animal lands and also the vegetable lands?
Yep. So we have most of our fields, about 40 acres of it, are set up in a Silva Pasture-based system. So last year we put in another 5,000 trees, and what a Silva Pasture is, it's where we're integrating perennial food crops, livestock, and annuals together. So these trees are planted in alleys that are 30 feet on center away from each other. And depending on the season and the year, we're either alley cropping annuals like row crops like potatoes or sweet potatoes, winter squash, zucchini, or in an alternating year, we're grazing our birds through that zone. We also have a few blocks that are more traditional vegetable fields where we're doing larger blocks of row cropping. And then we also have a small 1 acre section that we call our market garden. And that's where we're doing more high-end greens like spinach, arugula, braising mix, small radishes and beets that are harvested with the greens. And those sort of like walk behind BCS cultivation practices are also how we're managing all of our low tunnels and high tunnels as well.
That's awesome. When did you start doing the Silva Pasture?
Well, the plan to install it started about 3 years ago. Mm-hmm. In August of 2019, we installed 3 berms and swales that run across the whole property to deal with stormwater runoff issues and just dealing with the water that's an issue on the farm since we're farming on such a steep slope. And then when we decided that we were going to be laying out the farm that way, we had to order all of the trees that we're going to be planting because an apple tree actually lives its first 2 years in a nursery before it comes to the farm for us to plant. So the design really started almost back as late of 2017, early 2018, but we didn't actually implement it until last year in around April or May when we planted those apple trees.
Are you getting any support from NRCS? Do you have an EQIP contract for any of that? Or?
We do have an EQIP contract, but for this, we needed to get all of the field work done in a fast time frame.
Right.
And we just decided that we weren't going to apply for because they do coverage for swales and that sort of water management. But we have an EQIP grant for our cover crop and season extension with our tunnels.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And pollinator strips.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the pollinator strips.
So each swale takes up about 15 feet uphill and then 15 feet downhill. Mm-hmm. So we planted all of those with native warm season grasses for migratory birds. We came up with a seed list with the Audubon Society. So we planted about, I think, almost 100 different varieties of grasses and flowers within there. And those zones were not mowing, we're just letting them kind of go wild. So we have these 3 swales every 250 feet up the hill. There's about a 30-foot wide strip that's 3,500 feet long for pollinators.
That's great. Something that's like jumping into my head as you're telling me all this is like how great it's going to be when the pandemic is over and you can start having large groups come out here to tour all these great practices. I mean, I just don't know that many farms that are doing Silva Pasture with, poultry and with, tree crops and annual crops mixed in with that, and then the pollinator habitat. I mean, and the bird habitat too. But yeah, it's just fantastic.
Yeah, we're working on a pretty robust offering for this year. I mean, last year, not knowing what was going on with COVID,
right.
we really had no idea what to expect. But being that we have an outdoor dining option here, we were insanely busy. I mean, from August through October, we were seeing 1,000 people every single day of the weekend. It was really it was amazing. But with that, we weren't really able to do more of our intimate educational and dining experiences. So we're hoping this summer into the fall, we'll be able to bring that offering back. We're doing a whole dinner series that's going to be on Thursday nights that involves a workshop with our winemaker, so you can understand how our wines and ciders are made, and then ongoing farm tours. We're working on a whole self-guided farm tour system where all of the fields are going to have signs with QR codes, and then we're going to be updating what crop's going where, and then that's also going to translate onto the menu. So now that whenever you eat out now, the menus are just QR codes, so people will be able to open up the menu, and then all of the ingredients that are coming from the farm will bring you to a virtual map of the property, so you can actually see where the food is on the farm where you're eating, which we're pretty excited about.
That's so cool. That's really innovative.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about what you're doing to reduce tillage on the farm?
Yep. So we have 2 steps to our primary tillage. The first step is to use a yeoman's plow. That's essentially a subsoiler. This is what we use to loosen about 30 inches deep of the soil without incorporating and mixing the subsoil with the topsoil. Also, it's important to note that all of our farming is done on contour. So as we're ripping these invisible trenches, essentially, we're allowing water as it's moving downhill to perk deep into the subsoil, and then also creating nice channels for the roots to go deep down as well. Also, that helps loosen up some of the rocks that we have that are deep in the soil. Followed by that, we use a spader, and that's basically our primary tillage tool to create the soil in the condition that we could seed or transplant into. We had some issues with the way that the harrow was set up on that, with all of the rocks on this property. So we worked with the dealer and the manufacturer last year to have a heavier harrow put on the back of it with stronger tines, so then it could actually push down the rocks below the top inch or two. So we have really nice crumbly tilth for seed to soil contact and to transplant into. So that's pretty much all that we're doing now. In the past, we would run a Buckeye bed former after that to create a raised bed. But what we found was happening, since we have rocky soil, is all of the S-tine shanks or the hillers are resurfacing a lot of the rocks that the spader was pressing down and just doing more disturbance to the soil. So we're actually going to be doing away with all raised beds on this property now, being that we have all of the rocks. This advantage is that the soil perks really well, so there's no real need to have the beds lifted. So we'll be transplanting or seeding now right into the soil after the spader.
That's great. And can you talk a little bit about your seeding process?
Yeah, so for transplants, we're using a rain flow water wheel or a mechanical transplanter. For direct seeding, we did use just a Jang in the past, but we just purchased a Sutton Ag Junior. That's a tractor-mounted seeder. So we'll be using that for all of our roots and greens that get transplanted. But one thing that we're excited about with that is that we're going to be able to use that for cover cropping as well. So there's 21 slots that seeds can fall out with what our bed specs are. So now if we're just harvesting and flipping a bed or two at a time, we're going to be able to go in and put in a quick cover crop like buckwheat or something like that in the middle of the summer. Where in the past we didn't really have that luxury. We would have to wait until a whole block was harvested, and then we would go in with a cone spreader or a broadcaster and spread the whole lot at once.
Got it. So about how many more days of living cover do you think you'll get with this new seeder?
So I think that really what we're going to be being able to add is a quick summer cover crop like buckwheat. That's anywhere between 35 to 45 days. So that's probably the addition that we'll get. normally we're planting a winter cover crop or an early spring cover crop that will give us anywhere between 90 to 120 days. So every field's getting that at least one point in the season, but now we'll be able to have the potential to have this second little boost of cover crop mid-season in between successions.
That's great. Well, thanks so much. This has been a great conversation.
Yep, thank you too.
One of the challenges of the Conservation Innovation Grant has been to adopt techniques that reduce our tillage. So a couple things we've done here at North Slope Farm. One is we've used a clear plastic to cover the bed. During high temperatures of the sun beating down, it kills all the weeds. And then we've been able to just seed into that without doing any tillage. And so that's a thing that we tried, and we found it worked during the heat of the summer. Another thing that we tried was to do a heavy organic layer. So, and this is like 2 years after doing heavy lasagna type mulching, where we put a paper layer. In this case, it was just dry winter killed cover crop, real thick on the bottom. And then we put a layer of compost on top of that. And then we put a layer of really broken down old wood chips on top of that. And then even then you could have put fresher wood chips on top of that. And then the idea is that all just breaks down. You're not disturbing the soil, so you don't have new weeds germinating and growing up through. And so, 2 years ago we did that to these beds. Since then we've grown 2 or 3 crops in them every year. And so I just wanted to take a look at it. We've got, this is a arugula left over from the previous crop. This is a weed, henbit, I think it is. It grows in the edges of the beds and comes in. So we're always struggling against this guy, but it's not hard to remove it. The soil's certainly the top is really loose and really friable. So, we didn't broad fork, we haven't rototilled this. This spring I did churn the surface with a power harrow, which just goes like that, just to sort of try to keep the spring weeds under control.
Talked a little bit about what some of your practices are here on the farm. Is there anything that you've done differently in the 2 years going into the 3rd year now of the project?
So I would say that we definitely have adopted the solarization. So by late May, we're able to effectively mow and then kill all the surface growth on vegetation by using clear plastic and just getting a good seal, and it really kills everything. And then we've been able to just direct seed without doing any kind of tillage.
Nice. And what were you doing before that?
So pretty much if we were going to plant carrots or salad mix, we would compost, broad fork, and then rototill. And basically we would broad fork because it was the best way to get the rototiller to do a good job. And we would add the compost to try to lessen the damage to the soil by tillage.
Right. And is that at all, does it save you any time, or are you seeing any other benefits to the solarization process, or does it take a little more time? How's that working out?
So it's definitely a practice that we're adopting because it's making our life easier. On the one hand, we're not doing the tillage, so adding the compost is less of a priority, especially now that our soil's getting to a high level of organic matter. In the beginning, we had really low organic matter, so it was pretty critical to add the compost. But now we're at like 10 to 12% organic matter in these big garden beds, and we're actually thinking that maybe we should stop adding. So the practice is limited, and then it doesn't work in the spring, it doesn't work in the fall.
Right.
So the other practice that we tried to adopt to do less tillage, to reduce our tillage, was heavy mulching on a bed, and we took some pictures to look at that. And one concern with doing the heavy mulching was that we were going to add too much carbon and there wouldn't be nitrogen available for the crops. But we ended up having it worked really well with onions.
And are those on beds with similarly high organic matter?
Yeah.
Okay. And have you tried that heavy mulching in the fields that have not as high organic matter as the big garden?
No. So we haven't done that practice in the field. One of the reasons is we have a really hard time, if we have wet conditions at all, we have a really hard time with the field beds to dry.
Right.
So we're reluctant to use organic or heavy organic mulch.
Right, that makes sense.
Whereas in the big garden beds, they drain really well because they're really built up, so that heavier organic mulch is more viable. So, they worked really great for, first we planted transplants into it. I wasn't really sure how it would work for doing direct seeded crops, but after we harvested the onions, we actually were able to just rake the beds off and just direct seed right into that.
Nice.
So there was no tillage, and then since then we've direct seeded. I think we solarized that off and reseeded another kind of crop. So that was really good.
And how's your reed pusher?
It's we had a little trouble because the material, the broken down wood chips that we used for the heavy top covering, we had a hard time finding a pile that didn't have invasive weeds having gotten in there. So managing our materials pre-application is definitely an important piece of that. So we happen to have an area for handling bulk material like wood chips and compost and stuff like that. So, and we have a loader so we can scoop it. And to do all that material, you definitely like to have a trailer and a loader. So we have that, so it worked for us.
That's great. And one question I have for you is there, part of this grant is for each of the farmers to try one thing that they haven't tried before on their farm in the last year. Is there any new thing you're going to just trial this year? It doesn't have to be over the whole farm, but just maybe on one bed.
Right. What's our new practice for this year?
Yeah. What's your new practice for this year?
So.
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot there, but yeah.
No, I just don't have a good answer. Trying to plant into a cover crop that we knocked down. So like we could plant, like these beds have been lightly harrowed to mix in some oat cover crop to just get it growing, to try to stimulate the biological activity, not even for any kind of benefit other than just to try to have the soil start getting active as quick as possible. And so we could try to just crush that cover crop and plant into that. And I'm not sure what that method would be other than like maybe crimping.
Yeah, so one of the things that there's a farm that Doug at Gain Ground, who's one of the Massachusetts farmers, does is use a plank with a
this is what I was saying to you, Nagisa.
Yeah, like a T-post attached to the back to create that little crimper edge, and then they just walk along it, and then to crimp it down at the what's the anthesis? Is that the stage where it's just starting to flower?
Okay.
Trying to remember the right name for that stage. And then tarp it. So you know, they're on the smaller scale, you can get away with, you know, doing a tarp termination on top of a crimp just to make sure you get complete crimping. Because I think a lot of folks who are at the mechanized stage doing roller crimping are running over it a couple times to make sure that they get that. But with the board crimping, what I'm hearing most people doing is like doing a board crimping and then a tarp termination. So you could try that.
I think that sounds like a good. So we just got done seeding oats into the acre that we have dedicated for the CIG grant. There's a fair amount of grass in this field. The oats should be able to outcompete it. We do have quite a bit of clover in here as well. That clover has been spreading over the 3 years, which has been nice to see. Over the 3 years, we have put quite a few passes over this field mowing, but no tillage. That mowing seems to have controlled a lot of the broadleaf weeds and the Canada thistle by never letting anything go to seed. And yet, at the same time, we've been able to grow a very respectable crop of wheat, followed by rye the second year. That was a bit of a risk. Wheat and rye can share diseases, but now this year we're going into the oats. There's much less crossover of disease. And you can see the residue gets digested in this field pretty fast. I don't know if that has to do with just leaving it untilled. The mower just seems to chop everything up and it seems to disappear almost faster than it does when it's left on the surface of the regular field. So we'll see how this crop comes out.
Scott Morgan is actually our one grain farmer in the project and has been doing some really interesting things here at Morganic's family farm to reduce tillage and increase soil health. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're up to here?
So we committed 1 acre to the project. In that, this is the 3rd year. So we have not disturbed the soil at all. We have only managed crop residue and weed growth through surface mowing. So we've got a flail mower that we can set to be real close to the ground, and that chops up all the residue real fine, leaves a nice layer of organic matter at the surface. But it leaves it so well distributed that I seem to be inhibiting the grasses and the broadleaf weeds very successfully, and fostering the spread of clover. Some of that clover has been seeded to just get it out there. Some of it is just, populating on its own. They're not the seeded varieties. We're, at this point, we've got a good portion of the field that's just carpeted itself with clover, which made for really easy seed drilling this spring. I just, about a week ago, earlier this week, drilled oats into that ground, and it went in just real nice. It just opened up and you could hardly even tell where they were. So
that's awesome.
It worked great, yeah.
So you're noticing an improvement in your ability to drill into the soil? Is that because the soil's getting looser, or is there some other aspect?
So we have a channery silt loam, so we've got a lot of fine, well, they're not fine, we've got a lot of shale chips up near the surface.
I've noticed.
And what I notice about that field versus even my shallow cultivated fields is that those chips, the ones at the surface have weathered and it's just finer. The tilth just seems to be finer right at the surface. I would have, in a regularly tilled field without, just going in without tillage, I would be hitting just all the rocks from last season would be right up at the surface. But with all this 3 years of residue just kind of working its way down, literally building soil or duff or whatever you want to call it, it's still pretty digestible organic matter at this point, but it's on top of those rocks. And the seed drill's only cutting 3/4 of an inch deep to get that oat seed in. and it seems to be working mostly into old crop residue.
Nice. Okay.
So just a really nice, healthy layer of digesting organic matter, which is great.
Awesome. Yeah, I can tell you just now we found 21 earthworms in a cubic foot of soil. So that was a really nice outcome.
Nice.
Yeah. It was great to see them, and lots of earthworm burrows, and I found 2 earthworm eggs as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing their work.
Everybody's doing their work. It looked great. The soil looked really awesome, and you have a really good aggregate score too. A really nice structure I found on this soil. Mix of granular and blocky at the top 4 inches, and really strongly aggregated, and then going more toward blocky as we get down into the soil. And it's at least it's more than 12 inches deep in terms of topsoil for what we can find. So
that's good.
The soil health is looking great out there.
Nice.
Yeah. So what have been some of the challenges with your tillage reduction?
So for the grain crops, I have a bit of an ongoing worry, although thankfully it has not materialized, that there's a risk of increasing my disease potential because of the residue from one rye or wheat crop still being near the surface at planting time for the next rotation. So far, weather has cooperated probably to a large part, and I've had a couple of low disease incidence years during this, and so I haven't seen that. The rye that we grew last year did not come in as thick as I would have liked a stand of rye to be, direct planted, or as I would normally drill it. But it came up and it yielded, and it all sold really well. So
that's great.
And the quality was there. And this year we've got oats, which is my primary, my most heavily marketed crop is the oats. And it's 1 acre out of many that I've got planted on the farm and on some neighboring farms as well. So oats are such a vigorous grower, and what's out there are some really low grasses and a lot of clover, and so I think the oats are going to just, we had almost 2 inches of rain right after I drilled them, and with such vitality in that patch of soil, I think those oats are just going to come jumping out of the ground. I mean, when you were doing your digging, you may have even seen germinated seed. I don't know if you came across it. They've only been in the ground about 5 days.
Right.
But.
Yeah, no, I didn't. And what did you cover crop?
That got buckwheat after the rye last year. And that residue, buckwheat's pretty fleshy. It just disappeared. Once it got flail mode, that all just digested right into the soil.
Very nice, yep.
Yeah.
That's great. And you were having some trouble with thistle?
Yeah, and thistle in that acre, because of the regular mowing, is dramatically reduced.
That's great.
There's another field on the farm where I took the absolute antithetical approach and bare fallowed during the very first summer of this.
Yeah. And
I am still wrestling with erosion problems out of the corner of that field.
Oh, interesting. So
I eliminated thistle that way too.
Yeah.
But the downside is a problematic erosion out of that field.
So how would you say the thistle control compares on the no-till?
So far, it's comparable.
Comparable. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, the regular mowing and just being on top of it, never letting those fields grow up.
Yeah.
Is a big deal. Yeah.
Are you trying anything new this year?
So not on that ground.
Okay.
That ground I'm sticking with what we know. Like I said, we've got oats in there.
Yep.
This year's experiments, I don't think I'm going to do it on that spot, but I think I'm going to, I have some lentils, and I think here in the next couple of weeks I'm going to intersow a portion of the wheat with lentils.